Welcome again this afternoon to Coffee Time with Glen Cary Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Guptill, along with Pastor Kristina Hill. We have just finished a series on the book of Job, and we are now transitioning this coming Sunday to another section of the Old Testament, which is known as wisdom literature. 4 weeks in the book of Proverbs, and then 2 weeks in the book of Ecclesiastes. Folks from Glen Cary and those who are watching this, I want to give you the insight of what we hope from these Wednesday Bible studies. My hope is that you would take time and watch this and get yourself introduced to what the scripture lessons are for this coming Sunday. So when you come to worship, it won't be just hearing these themes out of the clear blue sky, especially on these themes of wisdom literature, the book of Proverbs. A couple of themes on Proverbs. We will have 4 weeks in Proverbs, which tends to take a look at more of a positive understanding of the gift of wisdom. It reflects upon the gifts of humans as the potential to grow wiser. Book of Ecclesiastes tends to take a little bit more of a negative view. There's a part of Ecclesiastes that the author says, vanity, vanity, all of life is vain. Well, that doesn't get you all fired up to wake up in the day and get on with it. Ecclesiastes also has this famous section that you probably all know of. There's a time for every purpose under heaven. That'll be the last section for these next 6 weeks. I'm going to invite you all to do this with your books, with Scripture. Open it up and get into Proverbs. It's not like a story you're going to read from the beginning to the end. Simply read a chapter. We're going to read chapter 1 today of Proverbs. And spend your day thinking about it. Ask the questions, what is the author trying to get at? How can I live a life in which I do not simply choose some definitive position on something, ignoring other information that can come to me? Wisdom, the gift of wisdom, maybe second only to grace and forgiveness, might be the greatest gifts that we have been given in our life. What's your experience and knowledge of these books?
I think it's interesting that we barely ever look into these books. And I'm curious about why we don't often look at them, and also why we are choosing to study them now, other than that they came up in the lectionary. One of the things I think of when I hear Proverbs is it reminds me kind of like a self-help book. You know what I mean? Like, we go there for guidance, we go there to find answers, but at the end of the day, it doesn't fulfill me the way I would expect Scripture to. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. I do. So it is a little bit the Proverbs feel like, I've said it before, eating a half a bag of potato chips. You know, it leaves you still wanting and longing for more. The Christian response to that is the deeper themes of acceptance from our God, forgiveness from our God, grace and healing are all gifts to us that almost are more important than the themes of wisdom. But everybody still has to wake up every day and ask the question, how am I going to live my life? And that leads us into one of two roads. One is ethics. How do I live an ethical life? I think the scriptures are filled with all of those themes. But in order to get to an ethical life, one must go down the road of wisdom to be able to understand the spirits of this world that call us either to ethical living or self-centered living. So I think they're a gift to us in so many ways. If you think about it, even though we are forgiven, we have all of these gifts of grace in our life, we really do live our life by these themes of wisdom and proverbial teachings from us. Themes in Proverbs, for example, I remember a high school coach saying, if you want to dance in this world, you've got to pay the fiddler. It stuck with me all of these years that it's not just that there are no free lunches, and I always add, okay, there's only one free lunch, the grace of God and the forgiveness of God. But an ethical way of living is to understand that we are responsible for our world, not just ourselves, but our neighbors and everybody around us. And so I find them to be extremely valuable to take us into a deeper way of understanding how to live.
I do agree with you that they are valuable, but we also have to keep in mind Christ. That, as Luther says, whenever we read Scripture, we always read through the lens of Christ. And I think one of my issues is that we have to be aware of when the wisdom books seem to contradict that grace of Christ. For example, my dad always told me, the harder you work, the luckier you get. That's kind of a proverb that I've lived my life.
Okay.
You know, you have to work hard. We see that in the book of Proverbs. It warns against laziness and those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it is not our hard work that is what gets us saved, or it's not our hard work that defines our worthiness in terms of children of God. And so just always being mindful of, we don't want our ethics to turn into works righteousness.
Correct.
We always want our ethics to come out of a heart full of love and grace from God.
The wisdom literature almost connects more with the prophets. So let me read the first one from Proverbs, Proverbs 1. And hear the connection not just with the prophets, but even the teachings of Jesus at what is truly valuable in this world. Here it is understood to come from Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel. We're not sure if Solomon wrote these, but it's very likely. So here's what he says. Here's the Proverbs of Solomon. That men may know wisdom and instruction, understand words of insight, receive instruction in wise dealing, and receive instruction in righteousness, justice, and equity. That prudence may be given to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. The wise man also may hear and increase in learning, and the man of understanding acquire skill. To understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. I find this tone to begin by saying that wisdom leads us to an understanding of equity. A self-centered person will not think in terms of equity. A foolish person will not think that way. A foolish person will not ask the bigger questions of, what does righteousness look like? What does justice look like? You can't read that and not hear Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of us? Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. And all of that leads, all those prophetic words lead into the Gospel of Matthew, right? This is not a lot different than the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus lays it out for us. The foolish man builds his house upon sand. The wise man builds his house upon rock. Is that Proverbs? Yes. Is there a deeper theme going on here about the identity of Christ himself? Perhaps. But practically speaking, I get frustrated when I enter into conversations about the themes of Christianity for the person who hasn't spent some time discerning what is cultural values, what is the American dream versus the proclamation of proverbial wisdom that takes us into something that is not just for myself, gain wealth, power, and all of that. I don't know how a person without the gift of wisdom can even choose the path of the ethical teachings of Jesus unless you spend some time discerning all the themes that we have been taught in our life. That's where I go with this.
You take a much more positive view than I do. Maybe I'm more of an Ecclesiastes
I'm hearing
person.
that right now.
Or a Job person or something.
You're still back into Job, huh?
I like Job, although I did get a lot of people saying they were happy we're moving on.
Yeah, really. The theme of this, let's begin with it again, that people may know wisdom and instruction, understanding words of insight. You, of all people, at your still somewhat, early years into ministry, I find you who like to engage in these conversations in a constant quest for wisdom. And I see you rolling your eyes at just things that are so simplistic and immature, if you will.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. You're a wise soul for a young person. Young, relatively speaking. What about that? What about this quest to become more insightful? I'll give you an example. One of the lures of our culture is the prosperity gospel. You can hear it be preached. You can actually go to people who have taught it, from Norman Vincent Peale to Robert Schuller to others. And the prosperity gospel could make sense as a way of bridging the proclamations of our American dream with Christianity. And you can come out with this. Prosperity gospel says this: if you do good and work hard in this world, God will reward you. Now, from Job, we've heard just the opposite message. It doesn't make sense on some level. I think the only way to get on the other side of that is to ask the question, does it really work that way? To probe those themes, staying open to all aspects of what it means to be human and what God really does require of us. And when you get to the other side of it, you say, the prosperity gospel is a complete manipulation of the Christian faith and its tradition. Although it's seductive to not be seduced by that kind of stuff, a person needs to go down the road of wisdom.
Well, and even a little bit, it shows up in the Bible. So it's not like the prosperity gospel just came out of nowhere. But we do see a little bit of that eudaimonistic worldview where if I do work hard and do good things, then good things will happen to me. Although I think that definitely has limits to it as well. I think that the book of Proverbs as a whole is summed up in that verse you read, I think verse 7, that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. And it is not how many books we read per se, or how many things we know. It really begins with having some humility before God and recognizing, God in awe, like Job did.
Okay, so that's how you understand fear, the word fear, as awe, an awareness of something, because fear shuts us down too.
I would rather have it be awe than fear.
Well, but that is
terror.
the translation. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So how do you understand fear in this context? As Luther would say, we are to fear and love God before he gives us his explanations in the Catechism.
I've heard it translated as respect.
Okay.
Kind of like you might respect a parent when you're in trouble. You know what I mean? I've heard it as awe. But I think it's interesting that it's followed up with a comment about constructive criticism.
Yeah.
It's like fools despise being corrected and being confronted. And I think we like to have God around when God comforts us. We do not like to have God around when God is afflicting us with commands, for example, or realities that we'd rather ignore.
There's Greek wisdom in the proverb that an unreflective lifestyle, or an unreflective way of living, an unexamined life, is a life not worth living. I think the instructions of this and the way that I have hoped to live my life is that when new insight comes to me, somebody gives me their opinions. somebody shares with me their ideas, that I do everything I can to take what they are saying into my life, into my heart, into my ethical framework, and explore the possibilities of what is being said to me or taught to me, whether it is proverbial or whether it is just nonsense. And for me, this is one of the great joys of life. One of the great joys of life, I think, is the chance and the opportunity to go through all things and ask ourselves important questions about what we are and who we value. So there we go. We're going to start in Proverbs, and I am inviting you into these dialogues, not just the ones that Kristina and I will have in the days ahead, but for yourself, enter into a dialogue with Scripture. Enter into a dialogue with God. Stand before God like Luther would have and say, how do I find myself before you, O God? And I'm hoping at the end of this, we will come out less reactive, less frightened people. I think because of the time we're living in right now with COVID-19 and the uncertainty of what every day brings to us, my prayer is that people choose wisdom, which is not reactive. It's not simply categorizing people as good or bad, on my side or against me. That there becomes a way in which we live a non-reactive, grace-filled life, and one of the vehicles to get there is a calm, non-anxious, wise presence. And so I invite you on this journey with us as we do this in the weeks and the days ahead. Till we see you on Sunday, God's blessings and peace be with you in Jesus' sacred name. Amen.